Hi everyone, I'm Josh, he, him. I'm a AR UX engineer here at Niantic. I mostly work on our photogrammetry app Scaniverse, and also sort of touch Niantic Studio as well, which used to be part of Eighth Wall, but is now our premier content creation platform. Yeah, happy to be here.
And I'm Daiga. I'm an AR, he, him, and I'm an AR UX designer. I was previously the designer for Peridot and Hello Dot for headsets. And I'm currently working on some features for Pokemon Go.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to stop my screen share and then let you all take it from here.
Okay, 1 second while I get screen share going. Um, okay, cool. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about VPS and AR within games. So making games is really hard, obviously, but making AR games is even harder. I mean, AR make developing games a lot harder than regular games. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why, what are the certain challenges that exist with AR games and in developing them and some solutions we found within Niantic. So the first challenge is camera on isn't a natural experience for people, especially mainly with phones, you know. Getting users to point their phone up is very difficult. It's hard to get them to point it forward. And then on top of that, obviously like holding it up is really tiring. So those are some major challenges with even getting users to use AR. And then navigating users in the real world. The real world is always changing. Things are not always the same. Safety is always, really challenging for users to point their phone up and then walking around in the real world. Um, and unlike, like RPG games where there's like a pre-made map where, the developers can place certain things really accurately and know where they want to put it, with the real world and the real map, like it's, there are certain things we can do like in Pokemon Go. There's like the map, but getting more specific, like the bench right here, or like there's grass here, that's really challenging. Um, and yeah, that's some of the challenges within AR games. And next I'll talk about how we've solved some of these. So with camera on, the main thing, especially in Peridot, that we focused was how to get users to comfortably hold their phone and naturally start using it instead of using like a lot of texts or pop-ups. So first with localization, we use this technique where the Peridot itself is greeting you, but it's kind of stuck in screen space, not fully in world space. It's kind of sticking to the middle of your screen. So it kind of, and it's floating. So it kind of gets users to like think, oh, I got to point it up because it'll be obviously weird if you're pointing your phone down, the Peridot is floating, but kind of above ground facing towards you. So it's kind of a simple way of saying like point your phone up without saying it. And that's something, that's really worked really well with people. The other thing with pointing their phone up is with the walking, we really adjusted it a bunch to make sure it's the Peridot's walking at in around this area where it's not straight up, but more kind of facing a little bit down, kind of like how you would normally point the phone, but maybe a little bit more up. We positioned where the Peridot walks around that area so that, they don't have to point it full up, which is really tiring. Having those kinds of considerations are really important, and, letting how people naturally do things guide the design is really important instead of what you want users to do. You can't force users to um, work a certain way, and you got to work with how people naturally work. And these are kind of similar, some ways we've found out how we can do that. And then with navigating the real world, in Peridot, we use things like semantic segmentation, where the Peridot app recognizes a bush as a bush and gives you like berries and stuff. And that makes the real world come to life more, but that's still not enough for people to do or stay entertained. It's really fun to see like, oh, okay, this area gives you this kind of food. The water gives you kelp, but that magic only lasts for a little bit. And after, maybe 1 or 2 sessions, and after that, it's kind of like a norm at that point. So how do we get more from the real world as a map for the gamers that are using our apps? That's where VPS comes in. VPS allows you just to interact with the real world around us more. We can, through the scans, place things in specific areas more. And, VPS and scans allow us to actually create like a game board, instead of kind of assuming or kind of guesstimating where things are. We can now accurately place things in the world more. So how we applied VPS into Pokemon Go. Pokemon Playgrounds is a beta released app feature that came out came out in the past few weeks. Last week we did a wider release. So some cities have this feature now where trainers can now like place Pokemons at Pokestops and leave it for other players to discover the Pokemon and also contribute their own Pokemon to the scene. So right here in that video, you saw a bunch of EV evolutions that are placed by players. And it's our first multiplayer shared AR experience on Pokemon Go. So how we made it work, in terms of scanning, we provide users, a hint image that they can zoom out as well. Not shown in this video, but we provide a hint image that users can always reference. We're using a radar ping to make sure users understand like something's happening. If it's just, a screen with some text and just says scanning, they're not really going to read the text. Most players don't read text anyways, so they're not going to really know what's happening. They're just going to be like, okay, there's a camera screen. What's the point? But by adding some sort of effect that applies to the real world, they're like, okay, my phone is scanning this area, and they can understand and have a little bit more patience, because they know something's happening. And then even though that's helpful, image and scan, some waste spots might be harder to find. So once we created this particle effect, for users to follow with their camera towards the direction, so that they can find that waste spot. And that's only achievable once users are partially localized. So that's something we were able to discover what we can do with partial localization. We call it limited localization. And once they reach it, we can create these paths for users to follow with their camera. So in this video, they found that arch, which was right behind them. And, these are much more effective than having some sort of like icon in the center of the screen or text. It's actually applied in the real world, which what they're waiting for, right? Seeing things in the real world. So having some effects in the real world while they're scanning also helps. And the results, initially, our testers were having a really hard time knowing what to do, but implementing these kinds of localization UX really drove our numbers up. And right now we're seeing, good results. A lot of players coming in, and right now, it's only partially, it's a soft launch, so that it's not every city. obviously applying these to a wide area is really difficult. So right now it's available in Seattle, Bay Area, SF Bay Area, New York, London, and Tokyo. And more cities coming, more locations coming hopefully soon. Yeah, so that's kind of how we applied VPS into Pokemon Go. And I'll hand it off to Josh.
Awesome. Thank you, Daiga.
Well, thanks, Taiga. Super interesting to learn about Pokemon Go and Peridot always. Great. Let me just set this up. All right, so we're gonna take a bit of a detour now, away from games, and more so into interactive experiences, and specifically experiences that have to do with Gaussian splats. But first, what is a Gaussian splat? Well, for those of you who might not be familiar, Gaussian splatting is a relatively new form of 3D rendering that has just been sort of discovered or come to fruition in the past year or two. For example, this video here is not a video of the street, nor is it an image. This is actually a 3D rendering of a 3D model of sorts. It's highly photorealistic, and it's probably the most the closest to reality we've seen 3D rendering get to this point. It does extremely well with reflective and like glossy surfaces like this fan here, where depending on the view, it actually like changes that gloss to make for this highly realistic effect. We here at Niantic have been doing a lot of work with Gaussian splatting from our splatting application called Scaniverse, where you can create your own splats, to Niantic Studio, where you can actually build upon these splats and create content with them, which is two things I'll be going over today. But before we get into that content, how do you make a good splat in the first place? Great question. I'm going to go over a few simple steps here that will teach you how to create a great splat. First step is to just figure out what you want to splat in the first place, whether it's like a motorcycle or a rock or a bush or this really cool looking observatory. And you want to make sure that it's your focal point, and you want to like plan out the splatting route in your head. A lot of people, when they start splatting something, they kind of jump right in and they start like from one corner, and then they don't realize, oh, there's a rock in the way or a bush in the way, and they have to like weave their body, and like that kind of messes up the splatting path. So we highly encourage you to visualize that sort of path beforehand. Next, you want to point your camera at the center of the object you're scanning. We don't say this anywhere, but your first few frames actually determine the thumbnail of your splat as well. And so if you start at the corner of this bike, for example, your thumbnail is going to be like the edge of the wheel instead of the whole bike, which is not as aesthetically pleasing. And also framing it just helps you get a nice, like it captures the high level view of the splat at the beginning as well. Next, you want to just slowly move around the subject, which is the bike in this case. You want to try to capture it from a variety of angles, high, low, and sort of like chest level. The reason is because splats are view dependent. And so even if you've like scanned the bike, a facade of the bike from one angle already, and you think it's done, it actually will look bad after processing from like a different angle, because you want to like hit the bike from as many different places as possible to create like a nice holistic view as you like pan around the bike. It's sort of a hard concept to explain, just because with like regular photogrammetry, you don't really have to do this. But with splats, it's very dependent on your view and like where the camera is in relation to the object. Next, just do the same thing. Just walk around the whole object completely. You actually don't want to scan for too long. You want to keep it to 3 to 4 minutes max, just because there is sort of a splatting limit. Essentially what you're doing is you're creating a point cloud as you're splatting, and it gets denser and denser to create a more high fidelity version. Problem is there's sort of a point cloud limit to the number of points we can spawn. And so if you get over that 4-minute mark, usually your splat starts to degrade a little bit, and we start throwing away your older points, which messes up the processing a bit. And finally, when you're done, press stop and then process it, and then this is what it should look like. So the bike looks pretty similar to the camera feed, and yeah, this is how you make a good splat. A couple other tips. Walk at a slow, natural pace. Location should always be the focal point. Sometimes you want to vary your distance. So get up close a bit, walk, further back a bit, just to try to get it from more angles. Try to like vary your recording and not just like stay at the same place. Um, and you kind of want to like act as your hand is as if it's like I don't know, I forget what it's called, but it's um a gyro, I guess, or like in film when you want to like stabilize your camera, like you don't want to do any shaky movements or like jarring angles or anything like that. Some things to avoid, don't try to capture people if you're not wanting people in your splat. Sometimes if it's too far away or too close, that could be bad. Don't try to splat the sun or like I don't know, super transparent glass or something, because we have issues with those. Um, and yeah, um, cool. Okay, so now that you sort of know how to make a good splat, well, what can you make with it? Like that's what everyone came here for. You want to design like user-centric games and experiences. So I've pulled a few different experiences here. The first one I'm going to do a live demo actually, which is on our studio website, which is this gumball experience. Hopefully everyone can see this. And so this was built with a flat of the ferry building. This is like the the right side, maybe. I think the ferry building entrance is here. And you have this gumball machine that if I press on it, then whoa, gumballs. Um, and it's this really delightful, playful effect where you have the colliders on the splat as well. And so these gumballs just like bounce around. But this is a really cool, fun little like photorealistic experience that's all accessible in the browser. So you can send this to your friends, to your family, very accessible. So that's just one thing you can create. This is another example, similar concept, but just with a sundial. Uh, I believe for this one, we just added a like a simple circular collider on top of the sundial. And it kind of, quote unquote, fakes the collision, but it does it in a way that's like realistic enough that you can pass for it. So you don't really need like the whole splat or the mesh necessarily. Um, to have like colliders and particles and stuff like that. This is all made in Studio. This is another experience from a museum, I believe, where you have a car and then you also have collider. I believe this was also using invisible colliders as well, like some on the wall, some on the statue, because we didn't have access to the mesh version of the Splat necessarily. I can imagine like scanning a larger splat and making a whole like racing game, like have mini kart in your living room or like Mario Kart in your in a rendering of your park outdoors, something like that. Like something really fun, and as simple as just like driving around the scenery that you're so familiar with. Kind of reminds me of like playing Hot Wheels with a kid or something. Like you're like in the mind of the car and you like get like this like new perspective suddenly because you're like much smaller or much bigger. So this is gonna restart in a bit, but everyone loves portals, and that applies to splats as well. This was an experience made by our lovely Ian Curtis, also known as XR Architect, which many of you may know him. He scanned this cave on vacation, I believe, but it's this beautiful like pool, this natural cave, and now he can like relive that moment whenever he wants by stepping through this door. And because splats are so photorealistic, it really makes for this really cool transition from reality into like a different reality and almost a different memory. This could be like your home or uh, Disneyland or I don't know, like a tourist location you want to remember. Like it could be anything. This is another portal of a supermarket. So if you're ever like itching for a midnight snack and like you're just really hungry at night or something, you're like, oh man, I really want to revisit the grocery store, but not buy anything because it's a splat. You can do this. But this really just shows off, I think, the nature of splats and how photorealistic they can look. Especially from like this initial angle here, I think it looks very realistic. Um, yeah, portals, they're cool. Um, Next, similar to the car idea, you can make like a platformer based on environments and splats as well. Splats don't have to be the main like interaction paradigm for your game. They can just act as like the environment, and I think that will become a bigger and bigger use case, especially whether it's for games or film or any other sort of visual media. I think if you can use it just as an environment, you can make a whole game out of like platforming on different real life locations using splats. Similar concept, platformer, but sort of like in a kitchen. Um, like you can make a whole platformer based around jumping around your house or something like that. Cool. So just a couple like common themes throughout all of this content. One, it's to really just create a good base splat. I think some of these splats don't look amazing. So like this one, you can actually look through the floor, and there's a hole. This one, a bit of it's like cut off or something. And I think without making a good splat, the rest of your experience will be impacted by it, like visually and also like technically you might not have like good colliders or like your character might fall through the hole or something. I don't know. So it's really important to like start from the like asset creation point of view and really follow those guidelines I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. Use shortcuts. I think this is just generally good practice for any game developer. Save time when you can and fake it when you can. So for example, we use like invisible colliders instead of the whole mesh. We can crop splats to like crop away any sort of artifacts or floaters or noise. Um, you can even like combine multiple splats together to make it seem like you scanned something really large when you really did like multiple scans or something like that. Think outside the box. I mean, Slats is such a new medium still and such a new form of asset that I think there's a lot of unexplored potential still. I've seen people start to use them in short films and VFX and using splats as like the background for. I think someone scanned like a forest and then brought like a Death Star into it or something, and it looked kind of cool. But really like explore, have fun and innovate. That's my last point there, just because I think, this medium is ripe for innovation and creativity, and that's why you all are here as well. I can't wait to see like what you all create, and yeah, I'm excited for this medium and what will come of it. But that's all I have. I'm gonna pass it off to Pablo to finish us up here for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. That was really insightful. 1 second while I get the slides back up and running. I'm going to post these resources in the chat so that you all have them, but you can also take a screenshot of the slide. But just going to walk through exactly what each of these resources are. So at the top here, we have our Niantic Studio documentation. This leads you to all of the information that you need to build with both Splats and VPS. A little tricky to find the VPS documentation, so I'm just going to really quickly show you all guides, XR, and then that'll give you a new VPS. And this will give you a really good walkthrough of how to use the geospatial browser and how to use and connect Scaniverse to your accounts correctly so that you can link whatever you're scanning to the geospatial browser and you can see those locations in the GSB and bring them into your Niantic Studio project. So really important here, make sure that if you are building VPS, follow these steps. Do not scan this QR code that you see here in the documentation. You get your own unique QR code when you open the geospatial browser from within Niantic Studio. If you scan this one, it won't log you in. I made that mistake. These are all unique to your workspaces. So If you scan another user's QR code, you're going to log into their workspace in Scaniverse, and you don't want to do that. So just make sure that you scan your own QR code from the geospatial browser as you open it. Next up is sample projects. So in the chat during Josh's conversation, I was also putting in some links to some sample projects that relate to what Josh was talking about. So in order to find those, you can just go to eighthwall.com/projects. But there's a lot of great projects that you can use to start from, or even to take some of that code and bring into your existing experiences. So for example, the vehicle controller here was what was used to bring in this exact same rover and the vehicle controls into that Splat experience that Josh was sharing earlier. So you can really just take this TypeScript file and import it into your project, make sure that you rename things accordingly, and you now have the same vehicle controller that you can use your up, down, left, right arrows to drive, which is really cool. I've used, as someone who's not super code knowledgeable, I use a lot of these sample projects to just bring different elements into the experience that I myself am building. So a great resource there. Next to that, we have our forum. This is where you can ask all of your technical questions. So you can see our developer support engineers are very active here in the technical support channel and in the other channels here. If you have feedback for Niantic Studio as you start to build with it, we strongly encourage you all to drop that feedback here. It's helping not only our Niantic Studio team, but also our developer support engineers understand what can be done to improve your overall studio experience. So would be really greatly appreciated there. And then lastly, we have our last two things. We have our Slack community. So if you go to eighthwall.com/community, you'll see a Slack link that you can click on to join our developer Slack. That's where we have a lot of conversations with regards to the challenge. You can ask any questions regarding the rules, the prizes, anything along those lines there. And then Daiga also put here a link to the Pokemon Playgrounds blog on the Niantic Labs website, which gives you a deeper breakdown of what was used and how it was built, which is really well written. So yeah, with that, we can jump into our Q&A. So if you have any questions from here forward, you can either go ahead and raise your hand using that Zoom feature or drop it into the Zoom Q&A. I want to very quickly ask the question that has been asked in almost every single Splat related event that we've had, which Josh, maybe you can answer this, is how do you actually edit or crop a Splat file to manipulate in a Niantic Studio?
Yeah, great question. Man, I wish I could like share my phone, but well, you can't crop during the splatting phase, especially in Scaniverse. So after you splat it in your library, you can go to your splat and edit it, I believe. And that's where you can crop it. It's fairly intuitive, I'd say. You can crop it from multiple angles, make sure it looks right. And then you save it, and then you can export it in the crop version, and it'll just work. So very simple. It's just the edit setting. We do have more like post-processing effects on meshes at the moment, where you can like filter and just the exposure and the contrast and everything, and we're hoping to bring those to Splats eventually as well.
Awesome. The next question might be more related to Studio, but the question is essentially, when opening World AR experiences, how does AFOL recognize flat surfaces to put a splat or to kind of like set the splat? They have tested, and the 3D world is not mapped to the floor. It's kind of like moving around.
Yeah, I can take this one as well. So you're correct. We don't do specifically like room segmentation or like ground tracking or anything. We're just doing SLAM-based plane tracking. And so usually the first detected plane will be the floor, which is why objects appear on the floor. But if you, I don't know, move your phone across a table or something, then we will detect the plane on the table and your content might shift to the table in that case. But for the most part, like keeping it to the floor will work pretty well for most experiences.
Great. Awesome, thank you. If there's any further questions, now would be a great time to raise your hands in Zoom. There's no more in the Q&A. You can either use the chat, but I'll give everyone a couple minutes. Otherwise, we will go ahead and end early. Hasn't happened in so long where we actually end an event early, but any further questions? There we go. We got one question from Namit. Is there a target file size for splats or GLBs to ensure a smooth experience? So this is more related to bringing them into Studio.
Yeah. Well, okay, so splats and GLBs are different files. Splats are usually PLYs and GLBs are GLBs. GLB wise for meshes, you want to keep it, I think we limit it to 100 megabytes per upload. You definitely don't want to go to 100 megabytes. We recommend keeping it under 15, I think. The smaller, the better. Splats are notoriously known to be like bloated and like super heavy, and like PLYs can be hundreds of megabytes pretty easily. Niantic though has just released its open source splat format called SPZ. You can find more information about it on our website and on our LinkedIn. It drastically minimizes the size of splats and PLYs to just a few megabytes, and we have it working in Studio already. So we highly recommend you use Scaniverse, export in SPZ, and then import it into Studio using SPZ as well. And it's all open source too. So if you're a developer, feel free to jump on the repo and start digging around the code too.
Cool, awesome. Next question is from Matt. Do we have any documents to help with UI design for XR experiences? I don't think we do.
I'm
It's a
not
great question.
sure.
Yeah. What we can do is I can share these slides. So what I can do is I'll email everyone that joined this event the slide decks that Daiga and Josh put together so that you all can see that and use that moving forward. But I don't think we have like specific documentation on those best practices. Alrighty. Next question. A little off track, but is there any XR design internship opportunities for Niantic for summer 2025? Yes, there are actually, they were just posted. There are, if you go to Niantic Labs and go to career opportunities, there are summer 2025 internships available. So yeah, you can go ahead and check those out now.
I think right now it's just engineering, but
Mhm.
I think there is some conversation about if we can or not have XR design related internships, but I don't think it's decided yet. But yeah, it's something we're looking into and we're not fully sure if we can yet, but yeah, if there is, I'm sure it'll be posted sometime soon.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you. I did not have that background insight. And then one question came from the chat. Do we have any eighth wall beginner courses? We do for the cloud editor, and I just posted the link in the chat. For Niantic Studio, there are a lot of tutorial videos that you can find, and that'll give you a good walkthrough of how to get started with Niantic Studio, but for the cloud editor, there is a course. However, just so everyone knows, if you're new to Eighth Wall, the cloud editor is not free. It does require you to have a pro subscription in order to use that. So Niantic Studio is our free option. Next question from Daniel. Can you move colliders? When I apply them, I can only give different size for a splat, but would be nice to move it. Yeah, so that's a great question. I strongly recommend watching our workshop that's on YouTube where Jamaica, which I think is actually present, walk through how to add colliders to invisible colliders, which Josh mentioned earlier, to the splat. So that way you kind of like create your own custom colliders and move them around as opposed to relying on the SPZ file. Josh, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean that sounds good. I mean Jamaica's here too. Um,
Yeah, I just
I don't
don't think
know.
she can unmute. Jamaica, are you able to unmute? 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 Jamaica, are you able to unmute?
Here I am. Am I able to be heard?
Yes.
Yep, we're heard.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, in that workshop, we talk about how do you put in a splat into Studio, and kind of the tricks on putting in the colliders. So how do you set them to be invisible, how you can best resize it, and the fact that you don't need to have a collider for everything that you see. You only need colliders for the playable area.